So this is a copy of a sermon that'll be preached at North Shields Evangelical Church. It's based on Revelation, chapter 13, verses 1 to 10. There's a link below to those verses. And also there's some links to some resources that I'll refer to throughout this talk. So chapter 13 of Revelation, which you should have read by now. Chapter 13 is straightforward to understand for about the first three words. The first three words of this complicated chapter are, and I saw. Those two words, I saw, are repeated throughout the book of Revelation. Chapter 4, verse 1, after this I looked. Chapter 7, verse 1, after this I saw. Chapter 7, verse 9, after this I looked. Chapter 15, verse 5, after this I looked. Chapter 18, verse 1, after this I saw. Chapter 19, verse 1, after this I heard. I don't think that God is taking John step by step through the history of the end of the world, one event at a time. In other words, after this I saw this, and then I saw this happen, and then I saw this happen, and then I saw this happen. Because this, and this will happen in this order before Jesus comes again. I don't think God is walking John chronologically through the history of the last days, one step at a time. Instead, it's more like John is stood at one point, looking around him at lots of events that are happening all at the same time. In other words, I saw this, and then I saw this, and then I saw this, and then I saw this. And every church at every point in history can expect to see this, and this happening around them as well. God, one vision at a time, is showing John all the things that every church at every point in history will see happening around them. So Revelation isn't so much a vision of the very end of history. It's more a vision of all the things that the church throughout history will see around them, from the days of Jesus' ascension until his return. Things that Christians in the 1st century and the 21st century and the last century, all these Christians will see these things happening around them. At least that's the perspective on Revelation that I am taking. But hang on a second. When was the last time you looked around you and saw a beast rising out of the sea that was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth? If you did see this when you looked out your window this morning, then you probably took one or more tablets than you were supposed to. The only person who saw something similar to this beast was the Old Testament prophet Daniel. In the book of Daniel, we read that in the 1st year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw dreams and visions in his head as he lay in his bed. Daniel declared, I saw 4 great beasts coming out of the sea. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard. Daniel saw 3 beasts that were meant to represent the 3 empires that would rule over God's people in Daniel's day and beyond. The lion represented the Babylonians who took Israel captive. The bear represented the Medo-Persian Empire that heavily taxed the returning Jews. The leopard represented the Greek Empire that quickly took over and replaced Jewish worship with pagan customs. Daniel saw these things ahead of time. Now John is being shown something worse. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea that was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. John was basically presented with mushroom soup mixed with liquidized haggis, sprinkled with eel's eyeballs, a combination of the very worst. By combining the images of lion, bear, and leopard, God was basically telling John, you know those rulers who oppressed God's people in the past? well, God's people can expect to see something worse. And the worsening of persecution by worldly powers is exactly what we do see happening around us. According to Open Doors research, 1 in 7 Christians worldwide face high levels of persecution and discrimination for their faith. 5 years ago, this figure was 1 in 9. The number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa recording extremely high levels of violence has risen by 2 to 15 in just under a year. Since 2018, 90% of the legally allowed churches in Algeria have been shut down. Imagine if 1 out of 7 Christians experienced high levels of persecution. Or if your closest African friend experienced extreme violence. Or imagine if 9 out of 10 churches in your area closed overnight. These things would concern you, and they should concern you, for they are happening to our brothers and sisters around the world. Verses 2 and 3 give us one of the reasons why such things occur. And to the beast, the dragon, which is described as the devil and Satan. And to the beast, the dragon, gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, and its mortal wound was healed. One way Satan goes about his agenda is through those who sit on thrones and possess great authority. Satan uses worldly powers to oppress God's people and oppose the church. All such authorities are symbolized by this one beast. And note that this symbolic beast is pictured with a mortal wound that is healed. Mere mortals die from mortal wounds. Only gods receive mortal wounds and yet live. In other words, this ruling beast is trying to make out that it is a god. In much the same way, so many in power claim a godlike status. In North Korea, Christians are taught to thank Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un for their food before meals. Their highest calling in life is to worship and to honor him. In China, the Chinese Communist Party is omnipresent and omnipotent. It uses AI technology to monitor its citizens and takes a very heavy-handed approach to any unauthorized Christian activity that is detected. In Saudi Arabia, the government demands absolute obedience. No citizen is allowed to convert to Christianity, and around 40% of the TV that they consume is about the Islamic beliefs imposed by the state. So many worldly powers claim godlike status and demand godlike obedience. And this leads to the worship we see described in the second half of verse 4. And they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" Who can fight against such authorities? No one can overthrow them. The slightest rebellion against their laws is punished instantly. Some obey them willingly, but just as many obey out of fear. They cannot fight against them. They have no choice. Who can fight against such authorities? Well, let me tell you about a couple of people who do. Grandma, at least that is what the house church that she belongs to in Iran calls her, Grandma came to faith in later life, and yet she was still prepared and advanced for how to cope with arrest and interrogation. Iranian authorities arrest and interrogate Christians on a frequent basis, and these interrogations can be terrifying, brutal, and go on for weeks. So Christians are taught how to prepare for these things ahead of time. And after being arrested, Grandma phoned her church and told them to collect her, after only 4 hours of interrogation. They were amazed that she'd only been held for 4 hours, and so Grandma explained. They asked her to stop talking about Jesus. She explained that she couldn't do that, and then went on to telling her interrogators about how she came to faith, how God miraculously healed her daughter, and how her family all came to faith as a result. They responded, "That's wonderful, just don't talk about it." So she explained to them again, "I cannot stop talking about it because I love the Lord so much." And she went on to explain her whole story again. They repeated their request. "That's wonderful, just don't share it." And for a third time and a fourth time, she repeated to them the same story all over again. She couldn't stop telling people about a wonderful God and all the wonderful things that he had done. After 4 hours of this, the authorities couldn't shut her up, and so they told her to go away. Much later, the authorities came to her house to take her home and all her belongings. The leader allowed her one small mercy. She could go back into her home one last time, and anything she could carry out, she could keep. After going back into her house, she walked out with 2 Bibles under her arms. She told them she'd had everything she needed. Who is like the Iranian authorities, and who can fight against them? Grandma did, and so did Ming. When Ming came to faith in China, his family reported him to the authorities, and they put him under house arrest. From day one, he was regarded as a threat by the authorities, and his activities were constantly monitored. And yet, Ming felt a calling to distribute Bibles. You cannot buy a Bible on Amazon in China, and only a limited number of government-approved censored versions of the Bible are allowed to be distributed. For this reason, Ming began nighttime trips to deliver illegal Bibles in great secrecy. Eventually, his activities were discovered, and now he cannot even own a Bible himself because his home is raided so frequently. And yet this is Ming's prayer request. Please pray for my bad back, which makes hauling large deliveries of Bibles around very hard. He gets Bibles and presumably delivers them immediately, so that no Bible is ever found in his house. Who is like the Chinese Communist Party, and who can fight against them? People like Ming do. But how? How and why are so many believers showing such faith and such courage? Well, Revelation is clear that we're in a spiritual battle. And to the beast, the dragon that is Satan, or the devil. The dragon gave his power and his throne and authority to the beast. Satan goes about his agenda of stealing, killing and destroying, using those in power, using worldly authorities. Satan attempts to steal back unconvert believers. Satan attempts to kill their faith or kill them if they refuse. Satan attempts to destroy the growth and existence of the church. We're in a spiritual battle, and our weapons to fight against them are spiritual as well. As we read in Ephesians 6, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. With this in mind, be alert, and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people." How are so many believers showing such faith and courage? Salah in Yemen put it like this: "Your prayers are crucial to us because they lead to miracles." It is a miracle that in the face of such opposition, so many of God's little children are standing strong and causing the church to grow. So on a practical note, please make use of open doors or other resources which provide both information and encouragement. Open doors provide information so that you can pray informatively. You can access updates, you can access news updates on their website, or you can request a free World Watch list that features up-to-date information about the 50 most difficult countries to be a Christian. Open Doors provide encouragement. Open Doors are excellent at reporting answers to prayer. They cover good news, encouraging news, along with the bad. They share inspiring testimonies of courageous faith. But why? Why are God's people choosing to persevere despite all the opposition they encounter? One of many reasons is hinted at in verse 5. The beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. The time which the beast, which represents worldly powers, the time which this beast was allowed to reign is described symbolically as 42 months. It means very little to us, but this is a bit like saying Manchester United dominated in the first half, or the weather was terrible in the morning, or part 1 of the Dune film was rubbish. What word might you expect after all these sentences? What word might you expect all these sentences to end with? The word but. Manchester United dominated in the first half, but. The weather was terrible in the morning, but. Part 1 of the Dune film series was rubbish, but. Now in Jewish culture, 7 represents wholeness or completeness. In Revelation, the period of persecution is repeatedly described as 42 months, 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. In other words, half of 7 years, 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. Half of the 7 years, half of the whole. So when it says that persecution will last 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, when it says that persecution will last 42 months, it is basically saying this. Persecution will be a main feature of the first part of the story. But remember, there is another half of the story to tell. The Red Devil may dominate in the first half, but there is a second half when he will not. The weather may be terrible in the morning, but there is a glorious afternoon to look forward to. You may not like part 1, but keep going, because there is a part 2. Worldly powers may oppose God and oppress God's people during their earthly lives. But persevere. Believers have eternal life to look forward to. This same message was communicated to the Old Testament Jews who faced persecution in the days of the Greek Empire. We read, I've cut this verse short just for the sake of simplicity, but in Daniel 12, verse 11, we read, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end. In other words, terrible times are to come, but persevere. There's a second half to the story. This same message is communicated to New Testament believers. Terrible times are to come. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. That's verse 9 of chapter 13. Terrible times are to come, but persevere. Verse 10. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Why? Why persevere through terrible times? Because there's a second half to the story, a second half to our lives, eternal life with God in glory in the new heavens and earth. And note carefully the description of the beast in verse 3. The beast that represents those who claim godlike authority and demand godlike obedience. And to the beast the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. The beast seemed to have a mortal wound from which it had recovered. The beast wanted to spread the lie that it was immortal and would reign forever. The beast claimed it was the highest authority and therefore was obeyed out of fear. But all this was just a lie. It was falsehood to get people to obey it during its time in power. But, in contrast, Christ received a mortal wound. Jesus died on the cross, but was resurrected. In contrast, Christ is immortal, and he will one day reign forever. In contrast, Christ is the highest and only authority, and those who obey him out of love. And this is why persecuted believers persevere. Just as Christ died and rose, so too they will die and rise. Just as Christ will reign forever, they too will reign forever with him. Just as Christ's suffering was followed by glory, the pattern of their life will be one of suffering, followed by glory too. It is these beliefs that enable our brothers and sisters to fight against and overcome the forces working against them in the world. So, and again, on a very practical note, if you only access one resource, I would highly recommend subscribing to the Open Doors YouTube channel. The 5-minute prayer updates they release, say 5 a month, they are the most helpful, encouraging and powerful stuff on the internet, in my opinion. They share stories of our brothers and sisters fighting against and overcoming the forces working against them in the world. And as well as informing our prayers, their lives can be a great encouragement to our faith as well.